Today, I hope you know, you're in one of our Removing Our Blinders sessions. Back in 2020, we started doing so much work around facing race together. And one of the things that we implemented at the time were these really candid, wonderful conversations on a monthly basis called Removing Our Blinders. These are sessions where we invite a white leader to come and share their personal journey around racial equity. The personal story, how that impacts their work, how it impacts things they do in the community. And it has been just a very, I think, soul nourishing opportunity for us to hear from people that are, very candid and open with us. Today, that is going to be the case once again. We are so fortunate for the speaker that we have invited today, the leader that we've invited. I want to give a big shout out to Paige Stephenson. This is our board member, Paige, who, when we were brainstorming, said, I just have the perfect person to invite to Removing Our Blinders, and that's who we have today. John C. Miller, who is the president and CEO of Denny's. Many of you, I'm sure, know Denny's. I hope you all know Denny's. They're a worldwide organization. They are, one of the largest franchise full-service restaurant chains in the world. They have a 68-year history. But John has actually been with them since 2011. So he's been with them, I guess, 10 years, maybe a little more, 10 years.
I could just talk to their side of that too.
Someone needs to be muted, I think. So yeah, John has been with the company for 10 years. What I love about the company is their philosophy. And it is, we love to feed people, body, mind, and soul. I think we're going to find that in what we hear from John today. He even, as we were getting started, wanted to really join us with some coffee. He is that kind of person that really is thinking about everyone in this way. So one of the things that Denny's has been faced with, though, in the past and prior to John's arrival, was some racial turmoil and discrimination cases. I hope we're going to get some opportunity to sort of go a little bit back in history. But the good news is this company is really in a great place now. They have really become a place that we can really emulate in what they do around racial equity and corporate responsibility. They have some really wonderful, if you go by the numbers, which we always try to do in our sector, is reflect on those outcomes, those numbers. If you look at the numbers, 55% of their board members are minorities or people of color. Over 40% are women. And in our sector, that's very uncommon to see those kind of numbers. So their board is very diversified and inclusive. They have franchisees, over 50% of them are people of color. Their staff and workforce, 75% are people of color. And that even goes into their management, which is, I think, 80%. So if you look at the statistics, they are doing something right. And I believe that's under John's leadership. So how we're going to handle this today is I'm going to invite John to speak to us for about 10 minutes, telling us his story. And then Paige Stephenson, our board member and the president and CEO of the United Way of the Piedmont, will join him for a sort of fireside chat, some Q&A. And we also hope that you will send us questions in the chat box as you listen to John and things that might inspire you. So with that, I turn over the speaker to John, and I welcome you to Together SC, and thank you for being our guest on Removing Our Blinders.
Thank you very much. It is my honor to be here this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic. It's very dear to my heart. My background, I grew up in a small town, Chillicothe, Ohio, which was an industrial town that sort of got its prominence when the Mead paper mill opened there. A little bit before I was born. It was a stinky little town and quite polluted back in those days, and some laws were passed to clean things up over time. But there would be soot on my front porch every morning. Mom would go out and sweep off from the paper mill, and the place smelled like rotten eggs. And people used to say that was the smell of money because it was the biggest employer in town. And so that's where I come from. And just north of us was John Manville, Kenworth truck manufacturer, which is the only one still there, RCA, Alcoa Aluminum, a lot of manufacturing that's all now basically offshored somewhere in another country. And so I grew up in a town that was divided less along racial lines. So it was a very unique environment. It would be hard to find a town in the 60s that did not have racial tension, but we had very little of it in our town, although, there was some in other areas of the state. But in Chillicothe, working class and white collar is what divided the town. There are folks that came in from the elite schools, mostly from New England, some from Ohio State. They'd be pretty young and they'd run the plants. They had business degrees, and they came from families that had means in the first place generally. And they lived in nicer homes and drove better cars and lived in better neighborhoods. And some of their kids went to private schools. And then the other side of the tracks is there was railroad tracks, and the other side of it was mostly the working class folks. And most of my life with friends on both sides of the tracks, I was trying to resolve conflict of people that had a narrative from their families, from their churches, from their work environments to not like each other, to not trust each other, and to stay divided in how they viewed each other. And so when you grow up in that kind of environment, you sort of become committed to, of course, to try to unite people. So I love the name of the United Way. It just really speaks to me from my heart, from where I come from. And I do think there's a better way for equity to be distributed in our society to make the world a little better. So that's a little bit about my background. The mention of Denny's history is pretty interesting. When I was first called to look at Denny's, I didn't really want to get into family dining. I had a pretty good career in casual and fast food, and I was thinking about retirement. I was coaxed into coming out to meet the management team and to learn more about family dining, and kind of fell in love with the franchisees and the opportunity, and took the position at Denny's. So I get off the plane for my first ride into the Marriott Hotel to spend the night before I found a place to live more permanently. And the cab driver coming in, he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a brand new employee at Denny's." He goes, "Well, isn't that the company that discriminated against, didn't serve Black people just a year or two ago?" And I don't know, it was more than 20 years ago. So Denny's had become the poster child for, what not to do in the industry. The incident was actually April 1st, 1993. 6 Secret Service agents out of 21 came in, and all minorities, and 6 were at a table that took about an hour to get their food, filed a lawsuit that they weren't served or were denied service, which is a little bit of an exaggeration. But the management team never did correct the narrative, and that became the truth about Denny's. There were also some problems in California over the course of the year before, starting May of 92 all the way through April of 93, that where a lot of late night club business employees of the Denny's that ran late nights, well, they're all 24-hour stores, asked for IDs, and they'd interview people for whether or not they wanted to come in and eat, or if they just wanted to occupy a table. And obviously, nobody does that anymore. But back then, certain franchisees thought that was appropriate because they had a lot of people that would come in inebriated, walk checks, or have a cup of coffee and leave. And so that was investigated as well. So by the time the Secret Service agents filed their claims, Denny's was already working out an agreement to put in some more progressive training and policy to sort of get this monkey off their backs. And it was pretty bad timing for the brand. So we would say that was pretty well botched by the leadership team at that time, and how they managed, what was going on around the brand. We had a lot of franchisees that really hated that moment, that obviously, hated the view of the company. But even today, I will meet people that say, "I haven't been to Denny's in many years. I boycotted it because the company wouldn't serve minorities." And so it was a pretty dark history for the brand. It did lead the brand ultimately into bankruptcy. And then there was a second bankruptcy a few years later, when quite a number of brands have been cobbled together to go public, called Flagstar, and then Advanica. And then of all those brands, Denny's is the only one left. And so that's how we became Denny's Inc. So I don't want to talk too long, other than to say I would reiterate some of those things. We do have some policies. I kind of scratched out what I called my top 10. I didn't get that far, Paige. I got 9 that I wrote down. Just thinking about the things that are different in industry today, but especially at Denny's, which sort of gives us the ability to stand out and then lead others to share their best practices to make a lot more progress faster. If you look at the pace of progress of corporate boards, it's right now at about 15% women and about 7% minority representation, when minority population is pushing 30% of our total US population. And so boards should reflect the population of the United States, or at least the consumer base that they serve. They do not. That is being corrected right now in a much faster pace, but the pace at which it's changing will take about 100 years. We think there's ways to do that in less than 10 years, to where you can fully optimize the board, and through better approaches to succession planning throughout the ranks of management and leadership. And we think that tilting opportunity that way is a must in our society right now. So I would like to be able to talk about that a little bit later. We are at about 30% minority above restaurant, about 75% minority population inside restaurant through management. Our management population is actually a higher percent minority than our employees, our hourly employees. And then you've heard a little bit of, we do have the only Black chair in the top 200 chains. And Brenda Lauterbach is an accomplished leader, and she's done great things at Denny's. Our supplier diversity is also second to none, or it's actually second to McDonald's. But in terms of percent spend, nobody is even close to us. The average industry minority spend is just a little over 8%, and ours is about 14% of total spend. And that is quite difficult to do. By comparison, Target gets awards every year for being in the $1 billion roundtable. Their total spend with minorities is about 3.5% of their total purchases. Now, they are disadvantaged in that we buy a lot of our products from the good old US of A, except coffee, which isn't grown here, and a lot of our paper supplies, which come from overseas. But Target has to source quite a bit of their merchandise from China. But it gives you some idea about how challenging some of these goals are and how purposeful you have to be to meet them. It was also mentioned that we care a lot about culture. The way we do it here is what culture literally means. That's not what the dictionary says, but when you sort it out, the way we do it here is more powerful than any one individual, more powerful than the edicts of a CEO or a leadership team. Culture is a powerful influencer. There is a culture of a church, there's cultures of neighborhoods, there's cultures of charities and businesses. And so what we set out to do is put in a purpose-driven, values-led culture at Denny's, so that any change in leadership couldn't upend progress that we've made over the years quite so easily, without building a whole new culture and sort of throwing a big giant rock in the calm blue ocean, so to speak. So we talk about purpose and values at every single meeting that we're in, every franchise conference, every board meeting. We make sure that we're values-based. One of my mentors along the way was a guy named John Luther, that brought Dunkin' Donuts to prominence, took it from a small New England chain to an international powerhouse. And he basically, the first few weeks on the job, lined up everybody in leadership and had his departments compare who got great results, who had great values, and everybody that had great values with good results stayed. Everybody that got results without good values couldn't work for the company anymore. So values led the organization, and it really put them on the map to grow and become quite extraordinary. And so we believe in the same thing. You have to have a great culture committed to the right purpose and values, or you have nothing at the end of the day. And no one wants to spend their life serving an organization to find out at the end it didn't matter at all. There was no depth to it, and it didn't make a difference for anybody's lives. And so we want to make sure when our mission is over that we've touched people, served people, helped people, and did our fair share. And with that, Paige, I'll turn things over to you, and let's find out where you're going to take this thing.
Well, first off, John, I'd love for you to just share what was it, you mentioned that you were getting ready for retirement. I mean, why in the world would you have joined a brand that had challenges around it and wasn't in the best financial shape? You know, you had other choices to make. So why did you choose to go this direction?
Yeah, it's pretty challenging because it could damage a lifetime of a good reputation that I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough to have at that point in time in my life. And so to take on a turnaround assignment and a brand with a tough reputation is no doubt pretty challenging. I'm not smart enough to figure any of this stuff out on my own. So my wife and I were committed to prayer over, where God wanted us, quite frankly. And every time I'd get an answer, it would be to go to Spartanburg. So okay, I've been disobedient enough in my life. Time to be obedient. And I just decided, let's give this a go. I think also there's something in my inner core that when someone says you can't do that, you can't turn that brand around, it's impossible. I don't know. There's something about that sort of, what do you mean it's possible? Nothing's impossible. So I think I might have been a little bit drawn to how tough the assignment might be when someone says you can't do it. There's just a little something in there that wanted to prove different.
Well, I'm glad you were obedient and glad that you took the challenge on, because I know our community is better for having had you be a part of this community. So, you've mentioned culture and leading with values. So tell me about how you were onboarded into Denny's, and then to support that values-led culture. And then, since you've been here a decade, what kinds of changes have occurred with that onboarding process? Because I think that is so key as we're seeking to create that diverse and inclusive and equitable culture.
Yeah, I was onboarded in a typical fashion. You drink from a hot fire hose. You try to get as close to the operation to understand what makes the market tick. What problem are you solving for the consumer? What need are you filling in the marketplace? And who does it better than you? So you really start out with sort of the tenets of the business. We got quite a bit of research on our market positioning, on whether it was actually viable. We thought that it had a long-term future if the brand would have to be repositioned. And the feedback came back pretty strongly. You don't need to reposition Denny, you just need to run it like you're supposed to. And customers will come back. They want a neighborhood diner. They want all 4 day parts, everyday value, corner booth, park your title, place to go. They just don't think you do it very well. So that was music to my ears. Let's just execute better. But you get into the history, the financials, the proxy battles, the balance sheet, the debt covenants and agreements, and you really focus on so many of those things. And very little of it had anything to do with the common language to our franchisees, service models, commitments to service, ticket times, quality of food, presentation. Is mostly about the initiatives to save or cut cost and or survive. And none of it was about winning in the marketplace or values or what we stood for or how we gave back. One of the first meetings with franchisees was they wanted to do a charity. We had signed up a 2-year commitment with Special Olympics. And to raise a couple $1 million, we'd raised like $200,000. And we were in our 3rd year of a 2-year commitment, still couldn't get close. So I said, well, first of all, Denny's probably has no business doing Special Olympics because we have a very working class consumer, where our 1,450 stores at that time were located in about middle to slightly below the average household income of the United States. So there's the means to support something like that is going to be challenging, but closer to people's hearts, or feeding people that are hungry, getting education to people who might be first generation going to college. So let's do something closer to the hearts and souls of the people we serve. And so we started our No Kid Hungry campaign, and I called that charity and got out of that agreement. They were gracious with us. A lot of franchisees were angry with me because they thought that I was like the last CEO, didn't care about giving back to communities. Not saying Nelson didn't give back. That's not my intention. Just over a long history, him and prior to him, nationally, we didn't do very much. Locally, Denny's was always a pretty good supporter. but we don't have that many Denny's locally. It's the national effort of our brand that needed to step up. And so one of the franchisees, Doug Cook, said, look, there you go again. I said, well, you test me on whether it's true or not. And so we put in, our franchisees bought $1 million truck, mobile relief diner. We go serve thousands of people anytime there's a disaster, hurricanes, reliefs. We don't get a lot of media for it. We don't go call the news. Sometimes they show up with a little helicopter or drone, give us a little coverage. We just do it because we just want to feed people. We have our Hunger for Education program that's now given about $1,500,000 away in scholarships. It averages about $400,000 a year. And No Kid Hungry campaign will probably raise $2 million this year. We're the #1 fundraiser in the entire restaurant industry. There's about 130 brands that participate in No Kid Hungry campaigns. Denny's will outraise all other companies. Will raise a little over $2 million a year for that campaign. There is some grant writing that goes on in our own GSP area with summer meal programs and the like that come out of the No Kid Hungry effort. So we've really gone from kind of not doing very much to being very engaged, top fundraiser. We give quite a bit back, and I'm really proud of what our team's done. But the onboarding to what mattered most was non-existent. So we put in, day one is not you can or can't smoke or here's where to park and sign up for insurance. Day one is purpose and values. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, you're going to take your God-given talent, put it in the service of others, and you're going to feel great about going to work every day, or you're not going to work here, go somewhere else. So that's kind of how we kick things off. We have installed through our entire franchise system what we call a good start, rules to live by. And it's about, treating everybody like your favorite guest, regardless of their difference, background, hair color, how different they may be from you. They have their own reasons for being who they are. They have their own story to tell. And we're going to respect that and appreciate it. And we're going to serve everybody, buy from everybody, give back, employ all, serve all, love all. That's day one. So I appreciate you asking about onboarding.
Well, and I know that is so key as, we're setting that tone. Two different directions I want us to explore. One is, knowing that you've got a board that is behind you and that is reflecting the community that you're serving. So I know that from a nonprofit standpoint, different nonprofits will say, oh, well, I can't find the people to create a diverse board. There are 4 million excuses to not do the right thing. So tell us about that journey in getting that board to the diversity that you needed to have so that you were having those voices speak into your work.
Well, the good fortune I had is our chair at the time was Deborah Smithart, who was the controller and then chief financial officer at Brinker, where we worked together. So she knew me. She was frustrated by the search that they were doing. They had a lot of candidates that had track records in the industry, but she didn't feel, she also felt like we were missing sort of some depth of values in the organization. So we had a board chair at the time that was committed to sort of a new approach to Denny's. She'd been around a while and frustrated by the pace of progress in the brand. So being able to work with her to seed a board of like-minded people was a big help. So we've had a very supportive board from day one. That is a tremendous advantage. But also, I had the good fortune of a track record. Now, sometimes you can use that in arrogant ways. I know I was very lucky and had great mentors. And I know that. I also had the good fortune of landing on brands that were on fire. I ran Macaroni Grill when it was a small little tiny brand, and it just flourished when everything was scratch, everything was imported from Italy. We had chefs in every restaurant. And you saw what happened to the brand when they sort of changed their business model to freezer to fryer. It kind of killed them. They went out of business, but they're not completely gone yet. And they're trying to make a comeback now, cheering for them. But I had support from great mentors to do things the right way. And so what I was able to touch and run did really well in the marketplace. And so I had the kind of reputation when you have a board made up of retail and hospital and manufacturing, they're your board and you're the restaurant guy there. And so they had a hard time telling me they knew more than I did about what to do next. And so I had good fortune of coming in with credibility, and did my best to use that to my advantage. I think that the main thing is to then focus on best practices and worst practices. There's things you try that don't work. Back in 91, about the time, just about a year or so before Denny's was getting into trouble, I was at Brinker's establishing our first diversity and inclusion program with somebody that also worked at Brinker, who's now my wife. So she was the Latina, sassy, forward, got a lot of opinions and attitude. And my boss, the chair of the company, really liked her and said, we should do this. Well, nobody was doing. The middle 90s is when these diversity programs became sort of the thing in corporate culture. So we were really early at that. So I had some experience being picked to kind of lead that. So I was the guy that said, hey, we got to care and listen and be sensitive. And we have to have some training, and we have to teach people how to think about things differently. We only look through our own lens. That's not a broad enough lens to understand people that with different backgrounds. Gracie was the opposite end of the equation. Somebody'd come in with really long nails and she goes, how are you going to type? And leave the chip at home. That's for guacamole. Right. So she was the person of color that could say, hey, look, yes, you do have to park some of who you are and you have to conform a little bit. You can't, the enterprise has to make it, right? You got to be able to be productive. And so if you're in marketing, you can have those nails, but if you're an executive assistant and type all day long, you probably need to think about doing something different for a living. So she would be super candid and she could say things I would never dare say. So we were an amazing combination. She was an HR nightmare completely. And I was the person with sensibilities, and the combination is we put in a really good program. And I learned about some things that we tried that just didn't make a difference at all. They didn't matter. They didn't move the needle. They didn't get people to come together. And so having some of those early trial and misses, I think, really helped. I could share some of those, but I think the ability to kind of share the sort of the best practices that actually do work. Number one of everything else is, committed leadership to set the example and the role at the top. If the leadership body isn't committed to succession and change and management and diverse workforce and an inclusive workforce and an equitable workforce, then it's really hard for people coming through the ranks to make a difference. They don't have as much social capital. And so that's really where it starts. And so you have to have teeth in the agreements. You have to have meaningful goals. You have to have consequences if you miss them. They have to be just as important of whether you make the dollars and the cents. And if they don't, if the people side of the equation isn't balanced with the profit side of the equation, it's not going to be a great place to work. It just won't be. And so you have to start there. I'd say the other thing that I've learned along the way is you got to make it normal. It's not at first. It's so uncomfortable at first. I mean, I could feel the arrows in my back when I walk down the hall around the water cooler. The talk is, so I guess if we're white, we're going nowhere now. John's going to promote just, people of color, or I guess my tenure here doesn't matter. I've been here 28 years, but I'm white. I'm out. Right. So that's not fair. That's not the way to run a company. It's got to feel fair and equitable to everybody. It can't be so tilted an opposite direction that nobody wants to work there. This is, it's got to be a great place to work for everybody. And so when you try to do that, you start stirring the pot. Folks that had the expectation they're going to be seen as next, all of a sudden have competition, right? That is a really good thing. So to be able to make it normal to talk about race, to talk about these things that divide us, but that are never spoken about, it is hard at first. But once it becomes normal. So I remember in the 10th grade, and I'll do this really fast, but 10th grade psychology class, you'd learn about Freud, right? And I don't pay attention. I was playing sports, but it's just learned enough to pass, right? So got to see in that class. But basically, I remember this class about how we are naturally defensive, right, to survive. Mm-hmm. And when you're defensive, you're closed. And when to be open, It means to be open to another point of view, and you can change and grow, but you can't grow unless you're open and vulnerable. And so the ability to build a culture that is non-defensive and open is hard to do because it's not natural. We can't unlearn the experiences we have as a kid. If you grew up in a neighborhood where those Black kids were the ones looting your neighborhood, or so said the news, then your point of view is those people, right? You start to develop, you use that language, you adopt a point of view, and it gets deeply embedded in how you think and the lens you use to size things up. It's hard to see the value. It's hard to see they get up every day wanting to feed their children, see them get, and if they're a good baseball player, get on the right team, get good grades in school, get the favor of a teacher. No different. But you don't see that. You see your lens, and it's very hard to break those things down. So making it normal to talk about the things that divide us so that we can be united is hard to do. And I stir the pot. We get in the room, nobody says anything. So I'll throw some stuff out there. This is dangerous, right?
Well, I think it's so interesting, John, that the things you're saying were the approaches and the things around being vulnerable in the workplace and those kinds of things and being open. That's what Brene Brown and Simon Sinek are making a lot of money selling some books right now, in the past 5 or 6 years that really echo that wisdom that you've been practicing all along.
One of the things before the next question is you have to set it up. The first thing we do is talk about being non-defensive, getting peer reviews. We tell this whole story about Navy SEALs. If at the end of the day they are really hard on each other, they do a peer review on whether someone did their job and say their life depends on it. So you're going to get feedback on whether you're doing it right, right? So when we say doing it right in our days of understanding that we do, doing it right means you end united and reconciled. With a hug, right? So the goal is not to further divide and say my point was right and your point was wrong. The goal is understanding and reconciliation. When you get people to unite and come together, united we stand, divided we are not very powerful at all. So when you set that up the right way, then you can really stir the pot and people can talk about stuff. And there's tears and there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And sometimes you go backwards for a minute before you go forward. We had somebody say, why do you say axe? It's ask. Okay. Right. But fair question. Right. But you set this up the right way. And then the person, instead of going straight to defensive, saying, well, why do British sound British? And people in the South have an accent, and people in Texas sound different. In the neighborhood I came from, that's what we said. Oh, thanks for the answer, right? So it's views on policing, jobs, wealth creation, education, prison statistics. We've gone there in a big way. And it's powerful when people can deal with facts, synthesize them and go, holy smokes, Batman.
We got to make some changes.
People of color this is not okay. This is not okay. This can't happen another generation. And so when you get out there, anyway, you get the idea.
I love your passion, John. So it's one thing, I have the privilege of sitting here, well, at least pre-COVID, it was a tower filled with your corporate folks. And it's one thing to be able to create that culture and to onboard people and have that influence on them when you're in the same building, you're part of the corporate structure, but you've got franchisees. And so that's a different, that's a different animal altogether. And whenever we stop and think about, nonprofits, some of us are structured in some similar fashions from that franchisee perspective. But then just looking at the Together SC membership, we're all nonprofits, and what one does can impact the rest of us. So how do you go about setting those expectations for those franchisees and making sure that they are aligning with those brand values that you have?
Yeah, so franchisees get the same onboarding now. It took a few years to get that fully embedded. It's in e-learning. It's what we call our Ignite training program. So again, about right now through the pandemic, we've slipped. Right now, we're at about 56% completion rate for all new employees throughout the whole system. But we can track every new employee that joins, even in a franchisee. There are joint employer laws. We can't make them do certain things, but we can make them comply with certain training requirements. And our franchisees generally are on board with this. Remember, 52% of our franchise owners are people of color. So that it doesn't hurt that that's in our culture anyway. Now, that took years to orchestrate. It took a long time to create. You kind of have to be very purposeful. What normally happens is things go on market franchise to franchise. People sell, to the highest bidder. When they're exiting, they don't want to compromise that. So we have to be careful. It's called, tortious business interference if we interfere with the top dollar sum a buyer or seller can get. And we have our role that we play in it, but we sort of orchestrated it in a way that sort of created momentum, financing, and support for people of color to build equity and wealth and ownership. And I've been working on this for a few years. We're trying to get this new program launched, institutionalized by the restaurant industry that supports that, where companies can take employees that they've certified. See, employees, a cook, server, people of color may work for you and make you the money for you, but they don't know how to do the insurance and do the real estate and get the money in the loan and all that stuff. That's the administrative side of the business. Is hard to learn. It takes a lifetime and not that many people in operations. They may have run, a lot of restaurants their whole life, but they've never really done all that stuff to get one started. And so we're trying to institutionalize a kit of parts of how to support somebody that's actually running the restaurant anyway to be an equity owner after 5 years, and then they can sell and go start their own. So they're then certified by their franchisor and bankable. We have Firehouse Subs, Denny's, and what's the Noodles and Company. 3 companies on board so far to do it. We don't quite have all the financing lined up, but it'll be a way in which people of color can build wealth and have ownership. And the reason for that is so many big mature companies are into share repurchases coming out of recoveries. I think there's going to be another correction in the market. So it's years before that little pyramid at the top of each company is big enough to create wealth for new members, right? So this is how people sort of, once you've made CEO, there isn't going to be another one for 10 years. So it's so business ownership is a much more efficient way to create wealth in these communities. And so we like the idea through franchising of how that could kick off. It's not ready for prime time yet, but we're working on it. I'm sorry, I got off your topic. I got excited about that.
Well, no. I mean, that talks about the things that you're doing to create that equity through your franchise model and how you're making sure that they are lining up with your values. So
I think your question was really about how do you manage a franchise system? Again, we talk about purpose and values in every meeting. We share statistics on where we are, and then they have to do the same onboarding and training. And now and as I said, that took a little while to get that in because you had to navigate between joint employer laws, what you're actually allowed to do, but that's now installed through electronic. And at one point we were at about 86%. Why can't you get to 100? Well, we've got some servers that have been with us 30 years, and the franchisee is not going to take that server and put them back through a day one training program because they got to pay them for that time in training. So they basically have a little huddle meeting and say, kind of, here's what you missed, but they don't expect them to go through that. But now, as we restaff and people go through those programs, we should get a really high percent of engagement in those programs.
So you had mentioned earlier about the protecting your culture so that as leadership changes, you're not in danger of backsliding. So what are some of those things that you've put into place that are those stop gaps?
Yeah. So when we talk about, we love to feed people body, mind, and soul. Body is, the restaurant, the business proposition. Mind is through our education program, and soul is, hunger relief and or disaster relief. and then a lot of other things that we do to support it. And so if you started moving off of those things, like feeding the body, we've gone to 100% fresh buttermilk in our pancakes. It used to be lecithin, guar gum, all kinds of stuff in there to help you digest what shouldn't have been in there in the first place. 100% pure beef patties. We've got clean label on everything except, some of the Coca-Cola products. So if someone comes in and says, I want to go back to some cheaper base products, they'd have a harder time doing it. We still use some frozen vegetables that'll be gone by the end of 2022, all fresh then after that. So all those things sort of culturally, stand up to some things that give people pride. And then to try to move them, you're moving a whole population that came, right? Mm-hmm. So you risk them leaving, you risk, dissent in the workplace. So it does play a role in shaping the kind of leadership that you get to replace people that are retiring or moving on. Sharing best practices is something we do. So these quarterly meetings of our business resource groups are quite powerful. They're run by our employees. So if you all of a sudden took that away from them, there would be tremendous dissension in the ranks. I mean, people, are quite emboldened by that. We have, Black History Month. It is rich with presentations and celebration of all of our employees. We have, Hispanic History Month. Each BRG does something entirely different, and to express themselves in a different way. And so, we really love that. Our unconscious bias training it was every 2 years for just above store leaders. Now it's every year and for everybody, including franchisees. It's really fun to do. It kind of stirs the pot. You start out with stories. There's this continuum for what it's worth. This is a Corn Ferry. We paid $40,000 for the first meeting we had, but they did this work and they have this continuum. They start, and at the far left is, I'm repulsed by you. Right. So that's a pretty scary conversation. And just right next to that is, I'll tolerate you. Right. So diversity training is not about being tolerant, because that's not progress. Right. Yeah. And then the next is, I will accept, and then I will appreciate, and then I will respect. So there are things we acknowledge we can't respect. We don't respect people being short with another, someone, mistreating their children. So, right, there's things you're not going to accept or appreciate or even tolerate. But then at the same time, you learn about all these differences that we have that can be really annoying to somebody that sees them differently. And we all these little studies about how people of like come together. This sociologist does a study downtown Dallas right after a Stars game, which is a hockey game back when they won the championship a number of years ago. And they go into these clubs where people either go to have a drink or two, or to celebrate or cheer or do their chants before the games, and then where people go after. And so after this game, so all these people sort of gathered around, and first they're divided by jerseys, right? Right. Doesn't matter color, doesn't matter anything. There's a spirit in the room of this team and that team. And then as the crowd thins and thins and thins and gets smaller and more vulnerable. And when it gets more vulnerable, it's more divided by color. Everybody with tattoos is together, everybody without tattoos. So more people like me, that seems to fit my view. I am more comfortable around people that are more like me. That comfort is a good thing, and it's a bad thing. If we use it as a lens to judge others and keep a distance and keep from uniting, it's a bad thing. If we use it to say, I want to, I am me. I'm a unique person, right? I want to bring that me to work. I want to take what God gave me to give back and let it shine. And it's unique. I have a unique voice. I have a unique speaking talent. I have a unique basketball talent, whatever that might be. Use that to its fullest. What you don't have, what you didn't get, don't bother with it. You didn't get it, so you can't give it, right? So don't waste a whole lot of time on that, right? So being able to talk about these things on a regular basis through our unconscious bias training is really helpful. And when you have these sessions, and then you have them regularly, just like you would for, keeping your workplace secure, or we review the P&L every month, we review the people roster every month. Why don't we review culture every month, right? So businesses that do, I think, make a ton of progress in the workforce. And by the way, one of those best practices is the mandates from the top. I require a 50% minority slate for management and below. So you can't bring a candidate. The staffing has to be 50% or higher. Why is that the goal? Because when a workforce is not diverse enough, you got to set that above the 30% of the marketplace. 30% of the population is people of color. So you got to set a target above that, or you won't make progress. You keep slipping and going backward, right? So the target had to be above, and that's how we made so much progress so fast. You had to have a slate. It's not the Rooney Rule. The slate had to be of a candidate to put tension on the hiring decision. So early on, my first year or two, people come in and say, "Well, I had a black applicant, but this is the person I want to hire." I go, "But that black applicant didn't have any experience, and you weren't going to hire him, so that's not really a candidate. So don't do that to me." So you need to bring a candidate, and well, that's hard, or they have to relocate, or that'll cost more money. Did I say anything about relocation cost? It's in the budget. Did I say anything about it not being easy or hard? Technology, well, you just don't find people of color, that are going to STEM classes, and they got to come all the way from California, and I can't afford them, and they're used to a lot bigger salary. Did I say anything about starting wages? I said, hit this goal. So you have to be committed. There's excuses upon excuses upon excuses, and you have to just sit there and smile. It's okay. But the goal, right? And then for director and above, 40% minority hire. That's the deal. Succession. Somebody's been here 28 years. They're a clear successor for the next role. They get it. But then who backfills them? 40% minority hire. So that if when you put that system in, it doesn't take very long before everybody goes, "Oh, I get it." And then when you see the talent and the diversity and the celebration, and then you see the marketplace, the business case for it really, everybody just loves working here. Last month, Newsweek published most loved workplaces in America. There were 2 companies that were restaurant companies in the top 100, Chipotle and Denny's. People love working here.
I can attest to that because I get to see them and see the passion and energy. Share with us, John, the approach in DEI philosophy that Denny's has, and then thinking about, there's a group of nonprofits, philanthropies listening in today. So how has your approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion impacted how you approach philanthropy? I know you spoke around doing some realignment earlier on, but I know there's some other things that you've done as well.
Right. So philanthropy, there are all kinds of studies, McKinsey, Pew Institute, Boston Consulting Group, that have done studies. Ford Foundation has funded or had a little bit of a funding role in all of those major studies. And I don't know if anybody on this call is familiar or a member of Ford Foundation or connect anybody that knows them, but they're quite committed to see progress in America. So they tend to get behind some of these things, and they're one of the behind McKinsey. Anytime things are unfunded, they tend to step up and provide some resources. But the McKinsey study, they do a big piece of work every year about minorities and women in the workplace and where the workforce is moving. They uncovered that post-recovery, 2008 and 2009, the Great Recession, 25 cities represented 85% of the job recovery, which means rural America is going to become more and more poor if people don't move. There's no industry or jobs. So social programs and the cost of them will become untenable. It doesn't matter if you're progressive or conservative, it's beside the point. We have to move people somehow to where jobs are, and that's not part of our national mantra. It's not the way we secure votes. And so they're sort of pointing out there's a big problem if we don't, treat this thing as more of a national problem to be solved with a problem-solving mentality rather than a political mentality. So they do some really good work. But they also uncover, Newsweek is another one, Forbes and Fortune both write about this, that companies score a lot higher in their communities, and there's propensity to spend money with brands that are more socially responsible. The truth is there's really no evidence that that's material. So people answer the question that they care. Like go to Walmart, they've got cage-free eggs that rot and they throw away because they cost twice as much, and people that care about the chicken still buy the other eggs. So what happens at Target inside every restaurant, and you just raise your hand if you ever saw this sign, but at every Target there's a sign that talks about how to go to their website and look at all they do. They are extraordinary. It's the most responsible, giving, caring group of human beings I've ever met in my life. They give billions away. They give double the rate of anybody in corporate America. Nobody knows. They talk about it on their website all the time. You'd never know they did anything. So the reason people go there is they like their selling proposition, the value, the clean store, and the cash registers are staffed. The other stuff matters a little bit. So you do this because it's the right thing to do. I can't tell you the number of times people said to me, hey, there's a business case for this. We had consultants come in. We've established a DEI program at Brinker back in the early 90s. And they said to me, hey, John, there's a business case for this. I said, so you're telling me that if there wasn't a business case, it's okay to screw Black people, hold them down? So this is why values matter in an organization, because what's not okay is not okay. And so if you don't do it because it's the right thing to do, because you care about people, because you care about uniting people, don't put those people in your leadership team. You will not make progress if you don't do it. Forget the business case. That there is a case for humanity, and if we don't have that case, we got nothing. We got nothing. A house divided can't stand. A country, a church, a family, it won't work.
One of the questions that one of our attendees has asked is, over time, what ways has social media and the cancel culture, has that forced you to change the way you market things or run the organization? How have those outside influences impacted you?
Well, I think that it's a classic case of sides that don't listen and don't hear, but have a point that needs made, right? So if you're frustrated by no one listening, then you're going to kneel at a football game, and you're going to do some things that others would say, doesn't that divide us further? Isn't there a better way to do this? What about veterans? What about a disgrace to the flag? What are people that serve the country? Could that be harmful? And this could go throughout our society in any attempt to try to have a corrective course. And so the ability to come together, listen non-defensively, and say, let's problem solve this. We need police reform. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Will anybody listen? Can we get tribunals to review the bad cops? Can we not disparage the good cops? Is there a way to do this in a way that unites people more rather than divides them? So unfortunately, sometimes you have to go backwards to go forward. So it would be wrong of me to disparage any of these efforts when people are trying to do good. That would just divide us more, right? There's no reason to disparage people that are trying to do something noble. I think the right thing to do is say, let's do something noble. Let's solve the problem. What will really solve disparity in education? What will solve police training and use of excessive force? What policies will make a difference? How do we balance? Do we need this many cops? It'd be nice if we didn't. It really would be. It really would be. And we all want to get there as a society. What is it about Asian cultures that we can study? What are their best practices? That there's no graffiti in Japan whatsoever. Not a cigarette butt on it, right? That by the time you're about 7 or 8 years old, you know what you don't. Criminals in New Zealand, cops don't carry guns, right? But if then consequences, if you don't have your hands here on the wheel when you're stopped, right? This is in Asia, not New Zealand, then you'll get shot because they're not going to let you get away, right? So there are consequences, doesn't matter what color you are, right? So, but in our society, it's disparate. There's concern on whether it's disparate and aggressive toward people of color. And if that's what you know and believe, that's you struggle to trust law enforcement, especially if you come from certain neighborhoods. And so that has to be corrected. So how do we build trust? How do we solve this problem? How do we hear that it is a real problem? I supported the Amadou Diallo Foundation. A lot of people on this call have no idea who I'm talking about, but It's a mom who lost a kid shot by a cop in New York. So I went there to speak 2 or 3 years in a row and tried to apply what we do at Denny's. This group, it's not a mob, but different factions with different beliefs were there trying to solve a problem. They're talking to each other, kind of yelling at each other. Well, you're 80% more likely if you're white to be shot by a black person than the other way around, right? So it starts with something like that. And then the next comment is, yeah, but the incarceration rate of black people is blah, blah, blah. And this is going on, so you had people wanting to make a point of, I'm going to win, you're going to lose. If you don't go into any conversation with a win-win, if this is why we say at Denny's, the goal here is to reconcile before this is over. Those that are scripturally oriented, don't let the sun go down on your head until you've settled a dispute with your brother. The whole point is, if you live anything or outside of that belief system or that value system, society won't work very well. So the whole point is getting people to a place where they're functioning to listen and hear and care more, not to win and lose, not to create winners and losers. That doesn't help anybody. We should cheer for people we disagree with, right? That we don't, and we may loathe their point of view or their approach to things. We should be cheering for them to come around, not hoping they're dead, right? This is the whole point. We want to make progress and be for people making progress.
John, thank you so much for your insights, your perspectives, just that challenge for us this morning to make sure that we are looking for that common ground so that we can reconcile and we can be united and stronger together. Appreciate this time. And I'll turn things back over to Debbie.
Well, it is really hard to follow up on that conversation. Wow. And thank you, John. I mean, I knew Paige was going to hit a home run on this one, but she certainly did in encouraging us to invite you. Thank you so much for your time. And, all your discussion of culture and values. I mean, all of us in the sector can learn so much from that. And it really reminded me of this other quote. I'd hate to take away from what you said, but a quote that I've used a lot of times, which is a Peter Drucker quote, which I'm sure you know, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I thought that kind of ties back to the Denny's message, but also why culture is so important, because without it, I mean, what is strategy? So you obviously have embedded culture into all of your strategic work in your life, I would say. So thank you so much for being with us. I know there were some questions that we weren't able to get to, but I hope everyone on the call will just thank you for being here and taking your time today with us. And we look forward to more engagement with you in others, beyond today, if that's a possibility, because we really want to see how our sector can learn from the work that you're doing in your sector as well. So thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Yes?
Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. And thank you to all our Together SC friends for joining us this morning. We look forward to having you on another call very soon next month for Removing Our Blinders. We have another great conversation, and we look forward to having you then. So have a great day, everyone.